Hey, what's up, guys? I got my man Grant Baldwin from the Speaker Lab. This guy has done hundreds of live speaking gigs, and he's coached thousands of speakers. And I just thought it was so parallel with the music industry with COVID. And so, Grant, super stoked to have you here today, man. Thanks for joining us.
It is an honor and delight to be here with you, my friend. Thanks for letting me hang out with you.
Yeah, dude. So give a quick intro about your career in speaking and you transitioning from off the road,
Yep,
because
yep,
that's a big thing
yep,
that I did. Like even before COVID, I
yep.
started to pull myself back from the road because I got burnt out and just wanted to see my family. And the road isn't
Yeah.
as glorious as everybody
No.
says it is. And so I'd love you to just maybe share a little bit about your story.
Yeah. I think you're absolutely right. There are a massive amount of parallels. In fact, my whole career has been in the speaking industry, but we moved to Nashville about 6 years ago or so. That's where you and I connected. You were in town for a conference. And we met up through a mutual friend.
Yeah.
But being here in Nashville, obviously, is a big music area, and so I know very very little about the music industry other than a bunch of people that become friends with, and even neighbors who are in the music industry, either behind the scenes or artists or whatever it may be. And so just comparing some of the war stories, I do think that there are massive parallels to being a speaker versus being a musician and just being like in the quote unquote spotlight industry, so to speak. So if we go back in time, in high school, I was really involved in my local church, and my youth pastor had a really big impact in my life. And I was like, I want to do that. Like, that seems cool. And so that's kind of the path I was on. I went to Bible college, was a youth pastor for a little while,
Cool.
and then eventually worked at a local church as a youth pastor. And I really enjoyed it. Like, it gave me a lot of opportunities to speak. I felt like I
Yeah.
was decent at it, and really wanted to do more of it, and just didn't know what to do from there. So after I left that job, I started looking up some other speakers and just like stalking them, and like, how do I do this? It's the same thing like a musician who's going like, I'm decent at playing an
Yeah.
instrument, or I'm decent at singing, or I've got a good, or people tell me I have a good voice, but like, how do you actually get gigs? Like, how do
Yeah.
you get the machine going here? And
Yeah.
that's really where I was at. And so sort of like booking a couple gigs, and over the next several years was built a career up doing that. So I was doing 50, 60, 70 gigs a year all over primarily the US, and
And you booked
loved
them
it.
all yourself, like cold
Yep.
emails, calls, just
Totally.
hustled it.
Yep.
Yep.
Yep. Straight
Cool.
hustle. So
Yep.
no agency, no bureau,
Yeah.
no, big break, or anything
Yeah.
like that.
That's what I
I
did for
booked a,
music. That's what I did for music is
yeah,
cold calling emails. Yeah.
which, I think so many people, and for speakers, and I would guess with musicians, like, I'm just waiting for an artist or a label to sign me, or I'm just waiting
Yeah.
for a bureau to sign me. I'm just waiting for my big break. It's like, no, like, you can make your own
Yeah.
opportunity. So like for me, like one line use all the time was like, I felt like I had the potential, but I needed the plan. I had the potential, but I needed the plan. Meaning, like, I knew I was a decent speaker. I knew I wasn't the world's best speaker, the world's worst speaker, but I knew like there was something there. I just need
Yeah.
someone to show me like how to do this.
Yeah.
And there's so many speakers that we work with today that are in that same spot. So I was doing 60, 70 gigs a year. And like one thing you touched on earlier is I got to a point where like the 30, 45, 60 minutes you're on stage is amazing. Like when you're on
Yeah.
stage, it's amazing. Like there's
Yeah.
nothing that compares to that,
Yeah.
right? When
Yeah.
like you have the audience, they're with you, like it's an amazing feeling. But everything else is pretty non-glamorous, non-sexy. Like it's a
Yeah.
lot of waiting, and you're waiting backstage, you're waiting to go on, you're waiting in the hotel room, you're waiting in an airport. It's pretty boring.
Yeah.
And the other side of it, I learned pretty quickly was I had a friend tell me early on, he's like, speaking is a high paying manual labor job, in that we would get paid really, really well to stand on stage and run our mouth for a little while. But like, if you decide to take a week off or a month off, or you're not doing any gigs, like you're not
Yeah.
making any money,
Yeah.
It's the same challenge with musicians and artists. And so it got to a point where it's like, okay, I got to do something that's not dependent on me constantly getting on a plane, constantly leaving my
Yeah.
family. And so at the time I was having a lot of people who were asking me like, hey, I want to be a speaker. What do I do? And really where I was at, several years before. And so I started doing some teaching and training around that really took off. And so that's the core of what we do today is
Yeah.
I do a little bit of speaking still, not much, hardly at all. But the core is teaching people how do you find and book speaking gigs and build a business beyond just, wanting to speak a couple gigs here and there.
Did you have much merch or anything like that, or did you sell courses from stage, or like would
I
they
did a
let you
little bit of
pitch?
merch because the majority of the speaking I was doing was in the education space. So I did a lot with high schools, a lot with colleges, a lot of conferences with those students. So teenagers love to spend money. And
Yeah.
one thing that was interesting that I noticed was um, uh, I noticed a couple other speakers who were selling merch, and
Yeah.
I was like, I could do that.
Yeah.
Like clearly you're taking like what you're already getting for the gig, the speaking fee, and you're increasing the value of that gig. And
Yeah.
so I would go do one gig and I'd sell a ton of merch, and another gig I'd sell squat. And a
Yeah.
big thing that I noticed was specifically with teenagers was during the course of the day, a lot of times they're not carrying around much money, right? They may have a
Yeah.
couple bucks here or there, but if they're going on a trip, meaning they're going to a conference, and the
Oh
key
yeah.
for me was, are they staying overnight? Because if they're
Yes.
staying overnight for this event, this conference, whatever it is, then mom or dad's going to get, here's 20 bucks, here's 50 bucks. And so they have excess cash.
Yeah.
Versus like when I'd go to a school assembly, like nobody came to school planning on buying something that they don't have 20 bucks, you know?
Yeah.
And so I would sell squat at a school, but I'd sell a bunch at a conference. So yeah, figuring that stuff out really made a big difference. And also like the type of conferences, because there were some where, and I'd be curious what it was like for you, but there were some conferences or events where it was so big and so many students,
Oh yeah.
thousands and thousands of people. Like I would take less on the speaking fee, knowing that I was going to kill it on the
Oh
merch
yeah.
side.
Yep.
It was,
Same
it was
thing,
crazy.
man.
You
There,
know?
there was one where we did like 18 grand in merch one
Yep.
weekend, and you know,
And you
we
just have a
shipped
stupid amount
tons
of
and
cash.
oh,
Was
it was just
crazy.
oh, dude, it was just nuts. You said something really powerful about like, you know, when you're speaking and you know you're killing it. And I think a band knows that as well too.
Yep.
But one thing I noticed with a lot of bands and just artists is they didn't know how to speak in between songs. And that's one thing I wanted to get good at for some reason. And it's funny, when I would share my story, one time my manager said, you know, the most powerful part was when you shared your story, I heard the crowd kind of lean in. And it was just this relationship building. And so could you maybe speak and give some advice on how maybe to share your story, how to captivate a crowd? Because, you know, sometimes an artist might only have like, you know, a minute or a few minutes in between songs or whatnot.
Yep.
And a lot of them just waste it. And
Yep.
like, that's a connection point to win
Yep.
them in. You'll sell more merch, you'll build more connection. And just, can you maybe speak into that a little bit and why it's so important?
I'll give you an example. So a couple of years ago, again, like being here in Nashville, there's always concerts that are happening, at least pre-COVID. And so any big tour, they're coming through town type deal. And so I remember a couple of years ago, my wife and oldest daughter went to see Kelly Clarkson, and she was, I think, doing like a Christmas thing. And she lives here in town, and she was doing some of a Christmas show. So they went to see it at the main arena here in town, and they come back from the show, and I was like, "How was the show?" And I just remember them saying like how funny she was. And I was like, you didn't go see a comedian, like you went to see an artist, right? Like she didn't sing songs, right?
Yeah.
But the point being like, yeah, there was the musical side that everybody bought a ticket to see, but then there's like the human side of her being funny, of her being casual, of her just kind of hanging out with some friends in a, 20,000 seat auditorium or arena or whatever it was. And so there's just that human connection. Like one of the things I tell speakers all the time is when you're working with an event planner or with an audience, like you're one human working with or speaking to a collection of other humans. So like act like a human, like be a human. So I'll give you an example. When like if you're speaking, for example, and a phone rings or someone sneezes real loud, or there's something that happens in the room, like you don't have to be this robot of just like, oh, I can't stop my speech and I have to keep going, but just like, let's call that out. Like, let's have this
improv off of it, bounce off that.
Yeah. Like I love those raw, and speakers in general, we love those raw, real moments where this didn't feel scripted. Like that wasn't planned. Like it's like, we're all in this inside joke together, like that's so powerful. Cause that creates that connection between, like when you're trying to tell someone else about this, inside joke, it's like, never mind. You had to be there, like you want that moment with your audience. That like you had to be there. It was so powerful, this connection. And so just acting like a human from stage, like telling a funny story or telling, your like how the story or how the song was written, or, we performed the show 2 nights ago and here's this funny thing that happened. Like, that's just like normal human stuff that like people relate to. So share that type of stuff.
Yeah. I always say before, I haven't been doing as much, but when I do speaking gigs, I'd always think like people relate to my failure more than my success. Like they want to hear more about the plain stuff than these like crazy things that they'll never do. Right. It's just nuts. And you made me think.
I'll give you an example. Like, so again, a couple houses down from us, there's a country band, or one of the guys in this country band. And so I remember when I first met him, we were kind of talking, and I was like, what's a tour bus like? Like stupid stuff, but I'm just like, what's that like? Talk to me about that. And he's like, it's
a jail on wheels.
It is like, it's not nearly as cool as people think it is, but again, like from an audience, from a fan perspective, you're just like, tell me that behind the scenes stuff, like
Yeah.
that's just kind of
Yeah.
interesting. It's fascinating because we're not up
Yeah.
on stage, like we're not living that life,
Yeah.
so
It's a
like that
different
kind of stuff
thing.
is just kind of interesting.
Yeah, no, I look forward to getting back out on the road for sure, man. And I'm not gonna go crazy on the road again, but I miss it. I really do miss it.
Yeah.
I'm itching. I'm sure everybody's got the itch. But let's talk about like where we're at right now and what advice have you been given to speakers to monetize their stuff? Because like a lot of speakers, musicians, that are relied on the road. Like years ago, dude, if this had happened,
Yep.
I like having a tour fall apart, and it's the same thing with speakers, like lost their booking dates, they like lost their income. And it's like, I'm sure your phone was ringing, a
Yep.
lot of people were asking me like, did I have like a crystal ball? Because I came off the road a while ago and I tapped into other income streams. I'm curious what advice you've been giving and helping people, because you've been coaching a lot of speakers with that, right?
Yeah, it's definitely like the past, 8, 9 months or whatever it's been. It's just been weird, obviously for the
Yeah.
world, but certainly for both of our industries.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's if same spot of a couple years ago, like where I was speaking 60, 70 times a year, and then that just comes to a halt, like I would have been screwed.
Yeah.
And there's so many, artists, musicians. In fact, one of the guys that lives here in our neighborhood is Shay Mooney from Dan and Shay, the country duo,
Oh,
and
cool.
they had started their tour, and they had done like they'd been like I'm not a country music guy or anything, but they've been like building up their name recognition, huge name now, and they had just started like headlining this arena tour all over, I
Wow.
assume North America, but at least all over the US, and 30, 40 dates or whatever it was, and like the big arenas, everything's sold out. They got in I think 3 shows
Oh,
before the tour was stopped. And so
yeah.
I remember running into him a few weeks after it, and he's just like, we had all this momentum, and it's just like
Yeah.
you can't do anything about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So so yeah, one of the things I've noticed is that pre-COVID, that virtual was this thing that nobody really took that seriously. It's something that existed, but not a lot of speakers did it. Not a lot
Yeah.
of events did it, because like it's fine, but it's not the same, right?
No.
But one of the things that we noticed is like when COVID hit, it became the only option. And
Yeah.
so you saw a huge, huge increase in the number of virtual opportunities and the virtual gigs. And then I think post COVID now, like as things are somewhat getting back to some sense of normalcy, as the vaccine makes the rounds more and more,
Yeah.
live events are slowly starting to come back, like small events. I think we'll still continue to see virtual is going to be around for the foreseeable future. And so what that means for speakers and for musicians is, again, like let's address the elephant here of like, it's not the same. Like
No.
you cannot compete with being in an arena, in an auditorium, in a
No.
club with an audience. Like there's nothing that compares to that.
No.
But it does create some of these like opportunities of it, even like what we were talking about, going back to being on stage and being a human, of doing like I was talking with a different artist, and he said, I was like, man, what are you guys doing right now? And he's like, we're doing a lot of like pop-ins with whether it's companies or sponsors or fans, or just like a quick 20-minute Zoom call of
Yeah.
something. And they may perform something. It may just be some simple little acoustic thing, let's just do a
Yeah.
song or two, but it creates all these new opportunities that
Yeah.
didn't exist previously, or
Yeah.
that if they did exist, nobody took seriously.
No.
So if anything, I think post-COVID, I think this creates more opportunities, because
Yeah.
now there are ways where bands, musicians, artists, speakers can interact with their fans, with audiences in an in-person environment, but there's also
Yeah.
the online environment
Yeah.
that could work, and maybe even some hybrid stuff. So
Yeah.
I think that there's some real opportunities going forward for artists and speakers alike.
Yeah, I like that with like the pop in. I know I got asked to speak for a school because I manifest and whatnot, and I could charge for that. I'm doing a Instagram live with someone else, and they want to pay me for it, whatnot. It's a
Yep.
monetizing thing. I've seen some bands, and I'm sure speakers could like speak and share their message and have the tip jar, or
Yeah.
where they can be tipped, or perform live and sell merch, or just whatever it
Yep.
is, like just go live. And I think like what I loved about coming off the road, even before COVID, was the idea like I can only be in one place at one time, but
Yep.
when I'm online, I've gone from going local to global, like
Mhm.
I'm everywhere. And if it's recorded or whatnot, then it can be up on YouTube and be working for me
Yep.
24/7, because like I'm sure you say to speakers is like you can only be on one stage at one time.
Yep.
How do you clone yourself, kind of thing?
Yeah, well, and to that point, like and even if you're just like, yeah, I don't want to do online stuff, like there's a cap, there's a ceiling. You can't
Yeah.
do 365 dates a year. Like that's not
No,
sustainable. That's not healthy.
no.
Even if you are, like in my case, I was doing 60, 70 gigs in the education space. I didn't want to do more gigs than that.
Yeah.
And I was on the upper end of what I felt comfortable charging in that space. And
Yeah.
so I was capped.
Yeah.
And so you couldn't, the way that you make more is you either charge more or you do more gigs. And I didn't
Yeah.
want to do either, so then what
Yeah.
do you do? So if anything, I think COVID creates an opportunity for, again, artists and speakers alike to really think through like, okay, nothing compares to being in person, like on stage, live, that whole deal. But like, I got to think about like what happens if, let's say that we're not in COVID, but like, an artist loses their voice or they get sick or a family member has cancer or like whatever thing, like that can jack up careers. And so
Yeah.
thinking through like, whether it's merch or whether it's these pop-ins or whether it's other things that don't require someone to be on a bus or get on a plane or
Yeah.
physically have to be there. And I think that's where like you really come in, is teaching like, how do you build a brand and a business beyond just performing?
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with performing. That can still be a core piece of it, but building something beyond just that.
Yeah, like multiple income streams, it's
Totally.
just so important to have those. And, I'm sure as a speaker that you have all the different things from the books to courses to whatever.
Right.
One thing you made me think of, and, I struggled with this as well, but it's like, how do you go from free, like getting, doing it for free
Mhm.
to getting paid? And then how do you like scale your price up? Like, I'm curious to what advice you have there going from that, because I'm sure there's a lot of people that want to do speaking, want to get paid for music that are watching this. And how do you go from like, hey, like who's going to pay me to do this,
Yeah. So I'll give you from a speaker perspective, and I'd be curious, like, let's connect the dots on the music side.
Yeah.
Is that, first of all, I would say that there's nothing wrong with doing something for free.
Mm-hmm.
Big caveat, but as long as you know why you're doing it. Like, don't just do something out of the goodness of your heart, So get out of this mindset of like, I'm just an artist and I just want to share my art with the world. Listen,
Yeah.
if you just share your art with the world for free, eventually you can't afford to keep making the art.
Yeah.
And so you have to treat it like a business. And the same thing is true for speakers. Like, I just want to speak. I want to help people. It's like, that's great. There's nothing wrong with that, but you're running a business and like, you got to treat it like that.
Yeah.
So what I would say is like, so I'll give you an example. It may make sense for you to speak for free to get the practice or to potentially lead to other gigs. Maybe it makes sense to speak for free at something because you're going to kill it on merch sales or some other form of product or service that you're offering. Or maybe like this is, if this one gig goes well, there's big opportunities to do a bunch of gigs in the future with this one client, or even just like travel. Like my wife always jokingly says like, she'll pawn me off and say, hey, Grant will do any gig in Hawaii if you pay for the family to come, So like that works as well.
Yeah.
So
We
there's
had
a lot of
show
reasons
there once for that, me and my wife.
Dude, we've been a couple times, but I've never done a gig there. So I've done gigs in, I think it was 46 different states. So Hawaii was one that I've been to, but I haven't actually done a gig. So I'm close. I don't know if we'll get there.
Yeah.
But the point being is like it's okay to do something for free, but just like have intentionality behind that. The other thing I would say is you're going to get to a point where you have to start charging. And I tell speakers this, that you can't just give everything away for free forever and ever and ever. And you have to charge for the value that you're providing. And so that may be in the beginning, maybe a couple $100, and then it may be a few more $100, maybe $1,000, right?
Yeah.
But the other side of it, I would say, is no matter where you're at in your career and your journey, especially early on, is there's going to come a point where you're going to have to turn down certain free gigs that they just don't make sense. You would love to do it. You'd love to help out, but you financially, you can't make it work. And you got to be okay with that, because like for artists, like you just love being on stage, right? Yeah. Same thing as speakers. Like we just love speaking, but you can't just do something for free all the time just because you enjoy doing it, or just because, your heart's bigger than your brain and you just want to help people out. Like that doesn't work. So you got to be clear that you're running a business and you have to charge for the value that you're providing. And then at the same time, that may mean that there's certain opportunities where you have to say no, and it doesn't make sense for you to do that for free.
Yeah. Yeah. It's hard, man. And like, even if you did it to get photos or even video footage, like leverage that thing if you're going to be there. We one time had to pay I think we paid, I don't know, it cost me money to get to this festival to
Yep.
perform, but then they paid me afterwards, years going forward. And, you know, and
Yes.
we sold the merch and it built the relationship. I used to sometimes like, you know, like as far as quoting a number though, and you want to raise your price or whatnot, and you don't want to scare them off though either. What do you normally say there? Cause it's like, what if they say no or whatever? Like, how did you approach that?
Yeah. So in the speaking industry, there's a couple different variables that go into pricing, right? And so there's going to be variables like um, uh, the industry that you're in. You can charge
Yes.
more in some industries versus others. You can charge more speaking to corporations than you could to, you know, a nonprofit. You can charge more speaking to a college or university than to an elementary school, right? So different industries have some different kind of price points. Your experience level. If you're a brand new speaker, just getting started, nobody has any idea who you are. You're not that good of a speaker.
Yeah.
You probably won't be able to charge as much as someone who's just a better speaker and a better
Yeah.
performer. And another part of it is going to be your marketing materials, like you know
Yeah.
your website, your video. A video is really important for speakers, and so having some sense of like if someone doesn't have like I'm trying to imagine like if I'm a club owner and you come to me and said, hey, you should have me, trust me, I'm good. Like I'm like anytime they're putting someone up on stage, whether it's a speaker or a musician, like you're taking a risk. And so I need to mitigate that risk and have some sense of if you're good or not. And so
Yeah.
if someone can't listen to your music, they can't see, you know, whether it's a music video or whatever, just some sense of maybe you're amazing. You're just not what our club has or what we're looking for. So
Yeah.
giving them something to go off of, right?
Yeah.
But you want to make sure that that's quality, that it's professional,
Yeah.
that it's sharp, that it's done to the best of your ability. Now that doesn't necessarily mean that you need to have spent thousands and thousands of dollars on
Right.
you know a video or you know your music or whatever it may be, but you still need to make sure it's sharp and it's professional, because like whether we like it or not, like people judge books by their cover.
Big
And so
time.
it's hard to take people seriously if their marketing material sucks. And so you just want to make sure
Yeah.
your stuff looks sharp and it looks professional.
Yeah, you just made me think of something too, because like, and this would be the exact same thing. I think it's speaking is there's some places that are booking the speaker because they draw a crowd,
Yes.
and sometimes the crowd is already built in, and that's the same thing with bands. Sometimes, like if it's a club, it's like, look, like I don't actually care if your music is good. Can you sell tickets and so we can
Yep.
sell alcohol? Where other times it's like, you know, we've got a built-in crowd and we just want you to, you know, party rock it or whatnot, and we've got a whatever budget they have, you know.
Yep. Yep.
So interesting, man.
But it's also important to like be aware of that, because there's also like in the speaking industry, there's some events where they're big enough where they're like, we're not going to pay anybody regardless, you know? So if you want to do, you know, it's like I'll give you an example. Like we got at the time of this recording, we got the Super Bowl coming up, and whoever's doing my understanding, if I remember correctly, is like whoever sings the national anthem and whoever does the halftime performance does not get paid. And it's just kind of like, if you don't want to do it, we'll find someone else who does, you know,
because that
and so
exposure is
exactly. But what's important for an artist and for a speaker is like there's times where like exposure makes sense, but you have to understand for yourself that it makes sense, not because the event planner or the host or whoever says, oh, no, trust us, you're going to get a bunch of exposure. Like maybe you're getting exposure, but it's like you know, not to the types of fans or audience or listeners that you're hoping for. And so you just got to be clear, like sometimes exposure absolutely makes sense. You know, there's again, I'm not in the music industry, but there's what's it called, Bluebird Cafe, have you heard of that?
I think
Here in
so.
Nashville?
Yeah.
So it's this tiny little cafe outside Nashville. We've driven by. It's like in a little strip center. It looks super dumpy, but apparently this is where like a lot of country music singers have been discovered. Like I think Taylor Swift was discovered there, you know, and I don't know, it's maybe 50, 100 people in there. And it's just this little dumpy little cafe or something.
Yeah.
But so would you go do something for free there, knowing that a lot of like the industry titans are showing up there, you know, labels, managers, so on and so forth, that are there scouting talent? Like, of course you do that for free, right? Regardless of the size, because you know that the right people are in the room. And so that's important to just be aware of that. There's times that absolutely makes sense. I'd do free things today if I knew that it made sense for me to go do it, not just in general or not because they told me, but for me, it would make sense.
And that opens up doors, right? Like it's kind of like building your resume. It's like you've performed here or whatnot, or you spoke here. And it's like when you're writing your cold email, hey, you know, I just finished speaking at this, and you know what I mean? And it opens the next door. You know, what's funny, man? I had this huge opportunity. I don't know if you've heard of Dude Perfect or not, those crazy sports guys. So a few years
we
ago,
watch their videos every week. My daughters, there's a 50-50 chance if I walked out in the living room right now, there'd be a Dude Perfect video on. I'm excited where this is going. All right, tell me.
Well, they wanted to use my song, but they happened to choose a song that I didn't have my rights back yet. And so the label wanted to get paid when we would have gotten massive exposure and turned it down. And I've emailed back with Corey a couple times, and he doesn't respond to much of my emails anymore, which is frustrating. Corey, if you're watching this, come on, hook a brother up. But I've been sending him new songs, and now it's like that door is closed, and it's just like, oh, the label, you idiot, you know, like they just wanted to get paid, but it's like millions of views. And I think sometimes, you know, both speakers and musicians, we focus on the minor instead of looking at the major, and the opportunity is this, and they just, you know, it just slips through our fingers, man. Well, dude, one question I always like to ask, because I'm sure you've got a crazy journey, like we all do. And I always like to say a fighter isn't someone who ever fails. A fighter is someone who never quits. Mm-hmm. And so what's a time in your life, maybe on the road, just in your business, where you felt like quitting, but you didn't?
Yeah. Yeah. So, you know, I've been able to do some really cool gigs, you know, some gigs where, you know, you're in an arena with, you know, 5, 10, 15,000 people, and you can hear a pin drop, you got them, and you're just like, this is freaking cool. Yeah. And you have those kind of moments, you know, or you finish doing a gig like that, and you're signing autographs and taking pictures for a couple of hours, which is crazy, you know, like a couple times, you know, then you'll be out and someone will notice you or something, and like, it's still cool, you know? So you have those moments where you're like, man, I'm living the rock star life. Come on now. You can't see this. You see who your dad is. But then you have moments where you're like, you finish speaking and you come off stage and you're just like, that sucked. Like, I don't know if it was me or if it was the audience or like what that was, but like, that did not connect and that did not land. Or you have a client that, you know, is pissed off about something, and sometimes it's your fault. Sometimes it's like something that's out of your control. And then there's those times where you're just like, what am I doing? Like, this is stupid. Like, why? I'm at some middle of nowhere hotel in Nebraska. Like, I just want to go home. Like, this is dumb, you know? Or, you know, I tell speakers all the time, like, you never miss a gig. You do whatever you need to do to show up, to be there. So those times where I've had a couple of those times where, I remember we were living in Missouri. I was supposed to speak at a gig like the next morning in Indianapolis, and had like the rookie mistake, last flight out, flight got canceled. And I'm like, I got to drive, and I'm driving through the night, you know, 8 hours, you know, you get there, you get like an hour's sleep in the hotel. And like the show must go on. Or I remember, flying from Denver to Chicago, and like, there's a big blizzard in Denver, and got delayed. Flight finally takes off, land in Chicago, drive a couple hours to the gig. I'm brushing my teeth in the parking lot, and then go in this convention center or whatever it was to do the gig. And like, you can't like whine or complain about it, you know, like you
gotta
like
own that stage,
you're
man.
a professional. Like, you got to show up. So there's times like that, and you're just like, I'm brushing my teeth in this parking lot. I'm exhausted. I don't want to be here. Like, this is stupid, you know? It's just like, man, this is like, that's what you signed up for, you know, like that's part of it. As you gotta be a professional. You gotta treat this like a business. And like, again, the show must go on regardless of how you're feeling.
Yeah, that's so good, dude. Well, man, I believe personally, like, whether you're a musician, doesn't matter what business, everyone should learn how to speak, to build their confidence for business, for everything. I think it's just a skill that everyone needs to learn. And the fact that you train speakers and help people to get better at that, like, where can people go to find out more information about you and get plugged into your awesome stuff, man?
Yeah, everything we do is over at thespeakerlab.com, thespeakerlab.com. We got a book that came out a little while ago called The Successful Speaker, 5 steps for booking gigs, getting paid, building your platform. We have a podcast by the same name, the Speaker Lab podcast. So yeah, no shortage of resources that we can, you know, we'd love to help out. And like you said, you know, there's going to be people who are, in fact, there's several people we've worked with who are musicians, but incorporated into speaking. So they may speak and then do a song, you know, or that type of deal. And so there's opportunities there to kind of blend the two.
Yeah, get paid for both at an event. You get booked for both, you know?
Absolutely. So yeah, if you, if there's anything we can do to help you, if you're wanting to do, you know, a couple gigs or a bunch of gigs or wherever you're at in your speaking journey, holler anytime, and I'm happy to help.
Awesome, dude. Thank you so much for hanging out, brother.